First, I described it as a frozen conflict. Then, I suggested that it had become unfrozen. And now, in my number 6, I would argue that it is reaching a stage of possible fragmentation and dangerous recriminations. I'm, of course, referring to the 6-week war in Nagorno-Karabakh that led to the victory of Azerbaijan over the defeat of Armenians. But today, in this number 6, I'm not going to talk about the external parties to this war, not the Azeris and President Aliyev, not the Russians and President Putin, not Turkey and President Erdogan, and not Europe, France, or the USA either. I recommend that you listen carefully to the analyses and observations of people like Alexander Gabuev, like James Kerr Lindsay, or Thomas Deval, amongst others. Rather, today I'm going to focus on Armenians, my identity, my affiliation, my tribe, even my tie. And it will not be easy listening either, for you or for me. After all, I've heard with my own ears Armenians referring to the 6-week war over Karabakh as the Battle of Avarair in 451 AD against Sassanid Persia, Vartan Mamigonian and Kach Vartan. Others, seriously disappointed with the outcome of the 6-week war, have lashed out that this isn't Kach Vartan, but rather Kach Nazar, with reference to Hovhannes Tumanyan's satirical comedy about the coward Nazar on the throne. So to mull over this for just a few minutes, let me go back to my much younger days as a student in France, where, as I've mentioned a couple of times before already, I've also done a course in philosophy. And let me ask myself the question, what is courage? And to attempt an answer, at least my answer, let me bring in Socrates, one of the founders of Western Greek philosophy, who said also, by the way, that an unexamined life is not worth living. Courage, for me, is not the absence of fear. Courage is bravery, but courage also includes prudence. As Socrates implied, the Laches is a Socratic dialogue about courage, written by one of his students, Plato. Throughout the dialogue, two generals, Nicias and Laches, attempt to define the nature of courage, while Socrates himself mediates and responds. The Athenian general Laches states that all cases of courage are a sort of endurance of the soul. Socrates disagrees and says that not every kind of endurance or perseverance is courage. The general, though, maintains that courage is seen in the brave, the soldier, the general, who stands up in battle and does not flee. Socrates then asks if it is not possible to show courage in retreating, and that at times, by not fleeing in battles, one shows not courage, but rather foolishness. Challenging words, aren't they? But how do they transpose, in my opinion, on the outcome of the latest war and the ceasefire agreement that was brokered by Russia a few days ago? Now, I'm not going to pontificate about what is and what isn't in this particular YouTube episode. I'm not also going to dwell as a lawyer on the legal status of Nagorno-Karabakh that this ceasefire or accord does not resolve yet. There is enough of all that on the web already. But in the midst of the tensions and the protests in Yerevan itself, as well as almost the mutinying state of shock and the jingoism in the diaspora, let me simply attempt to plant a few seeds that might be food for thought. Might, not necessarily are. First, this conflict has been ongoing since the late 1980s, and it is therefore some 3 decades long. Judging its outcome by the benchmark of 6 weeks only is, in my opinion, counterproductive. The OSCE Minsk group had failed in its job over 20 years, but so had the protagonists themselves, including former Armenian presidents and prime ministers. Nikol Pashinyan did not create the conflict, but his attitudes toward it were, at the very least, considerably naive, some would even suggest criminal. Aggressive or bellicose stance, perhaps to nurture his own popularity, misleading the country by claiming that the Armenians were being victorious on the battlefront till the very day that Shushi or Shusha fell. An inability, I think, by this man to understand the concept of national unity at times of war. To paraphrase the clear-thinking Viken Cheterian amongst many others, in order to overcome this painful setback, there should, in my opinion, be an honest revision of the strategic failures, the miscalculations, the incapacity to understand the consequences of those political declarations or acts. Mostly, there should be a sincere analysis as to why Armenia found itself so isolated in the international arena. Armenia, we Armenians, need strategic thinking. We need regrouping around a new national project to overcome this defeat. Indeed, what Armenia needs today is a leadership with long-term vision that can unite the nation in those difficult times. And also, mind you, a public debate that can overcome the pain and turn it, if possible, into a positive force rather than degenerate it toward self-destruction. We also need to give some thoughts to the fate of Armenian towns and villages under Azerbaijani military control, which incidentally starts in earnest today, Sunday, plus the cultural heritage, the rich cultural heritage, including numerous medieval monasteries that are part of our history. Should there not be a mobilization there? Tatevank Monastery, Shushi Cathedral, the monastery of Gandzasar, a crown jewel of 13th century Armenian architecture, the 4th century Amaras Monastery that houses the funerary location of the grandson of the patron saint and evangelizer Gregory the Illuminator. Should we not? In earlier YouTube episodes, I spoke of the use of loitering ammunitions, of cluster bombs and white phosphorus amongst others. And for all I know, both sides and both parties might have used it in different ways. There should be a follow-up on their use. There should be an attentive listening to the testimony of all those monasters who followed the war for those 6 weeks as it turned increasingly more vindictive. Only by discovering the truth can the two sides start moving away toward some sort of, dare I say it in these tense moments, towards some way of reconciliation? Is a completely discredited international community capable of supporting the sides with such an investigation? Furthermore, the future struggle will be extremely complex, as this defeat has shown, and the realities on the ground remind us every day. And the new military and diplomatic realities aren't clear at all, at least to my simple mind. Armenian and Azerbaijani villages will now live side by side. And is there not a challenge here to create a secure environment, a new political culture that renders coexistence not salutary or wanted, but at least possible? Accusing everyone else, not oneself. Socrates and self-examination, I remind you, for this horrible failure. Looking for internal traitors and betrayers, tavajans, will not necessarily be very helpful. The new struggle, in my opinion, should focus quite strongly and densely on the basic and fundamental human rights. Human rights was mentioned 6 weeks ago at the start of the war, and then it disappeared in the fog of war. So how will Karabakh be governed? What refugees and IDPs or internally displaced persons can return where? And how will Turkey and Azerbaijan lift their decades-long blockade of Armenia as called for by the deal? You know, over many, many years, long years of second-track negotiation, largely to do with the MENA and Gulf regions, very little to do with the Southern Caucasus, I've learned that dialogue and engagement, not arguments and vitriol or bluster, or even money alone, are essential to instill a sense of security in the parties, a sense of security in volatile regions such as the South Caucasus. It's not the sniveling attitudes of some, nor the pretentious bombasm of others that will provide the answer. What we Armenians, and I come back to my initial thought that I'm self-examining here. For us Armenians, this is a very hard pill to swallow, be that for the Armenians in the Republic, be that for the Armenians in the diaspora across the world, but certainly, and most importantly, for the Armenians who'd been living and who'd established their lives and set down roots in Karabakh itself. But so is defeat. It is a hard pill to swallow. Can we rise up and deal with it? And a key corollary to this for me is, will our friends, whomever they are, be ready and steady to help us? Can we have the courage that Socrates spoke of in his Laches Dialogues about bravery and prudence? And perhaps today, to conclude, let me try to instill what I call the courage of hope with a quotation by Nelson Mandela. This troublemaking Madiba, a wonderful man for his times, said once, and I quote, "There is no easy walk to freedom anywhere. And many of us will have to pass through the valley of the shadow of death again and again before we reach the mountaintop of our desires. I repeat, there is no easy walk to freedom anywhere, and many of us will have to pass through the valley of the shadow of death again and again before we reach the mountaintop of our desires. All that is left for me to say, good luck to us all.